Hello, Dr. Hess and fellow classmates. My name is Scott Kleinman, and I will be presenting my thesis proposal to you in pursuit of the Masters of Arts for Intelligence Studies degree. My thesis proposal is titled Artificial Intelligence, Autonomous Weapons, and Targeted Killing, Defining the World's New Just War. This thesis is designed to examine the ethical and moral perspectives on the application of military force, specifically with regard to the continuing technological advancements of infusing artificial intelligence into lethal weapon systems, and the subsequent creation of machine autonomy to kill combatants in modern warfare. This thesis will examine and analyze this issue through the theoretical lens of just war theory, which I will explain in later slides. My agenda, seen here, revolves around the standard structure delineated in our thesis proposal framework. So let's get into some background. The Marine Corps' doctrinal publication on warfighting defines the essence of war as a violent struggle between two hostile, independent, and irreconcilable wills, each trying to impose itself on the other. War is fundamentally a social process. Thus, conflict is a human political endeavor, immutable in nature, and the underlying ethical principles of warfare are subjective in nature. The irreconcilable wills of violent actors harbor their own self-interested political objectives and generate organized violence on a scale sufficient to have significant political consequences that favor their intentions. So this notion explains the competing nature of technological development for military purposes, especially with regard to an achievement of an advancement that Russian President Vladimir Putin once stated would lead to the ruler of the world. This advancement that I'm talking about is artificial intelligence. An important paradigm shift is occurring within warfare and continues development to this day. It's the proliferation of artificial intelligence and its implementation into lethal autonomous weapon systems that may one day attack other systems and other human beings on the battlefield. Per United States Congress, artificial intelligence is defined as any artificial system that performs tasks under varying and unpredictable circumstances without significant human oversight, or that can learn from experience and improve performance when exposed to data sets, and as an artificial system developed in computer software, physical hardware, or other contexts that solves tasks requiring human-like perception, cognition, planning, learning, communication, or physical action. So beyond the bomb-carrying Predator drones used in both the Iraq and Afghan wars, the United States is now in a race with Russia and China to develop lethal autonomous weapon systems for use in warfare, despite the uncertainty of the ethicality and potential enduring threats to humanity. While America was superior in the former method of warfare, deemed a hyperpower by one world leader, the nation now faces technological competition from peer competitors in both how it fights and the systems that it uses to fight. In the continued development for more automation and lethality among these nation states, however, numerous studies warn of the magnitudes and risks associated with the pervasive development and use of algorithms and lethal machines. Moreover, morally and ethically fundamental questions arise concerning the use of autonomous systems in warfare, such as the consequences of having no human present who feels responsible for the killing that occurs in war. Furthermore, international law has been sluggish to develop policies both around the development of lethal autonomous weapons and the use of these systems on the modern battlefield. Key issues have arisen surrounding meaningful human control of these systems, the presence of bias within artificial intelligence's programming, the authority or lack thereof over these systems' potential actions in combat, the legality surrounding autonomy in a machine and its use for killing, and the question of who will hold the accountability for a machine that kills on the battlefield. So with all that being said, my research question is this. Considering just war theory and the nature of warfare that I just described to you using the Marine Corps' doctrinal publication, to what extent are these competing nation states balancing the advantages within a military context of using lethal autonomous systems, specifically for the purpose of targeted killings, with the distinct moral and ethical challenges of placing a decision-making capability within an artificial intelligence system on the battlefield that may not have any accountability, any human accountability over it. So the purpose of this essay that I plan to write is really to examine the proliferation of artificial intelligence and machine learning by these competing nation states for military purposes, specifically for the conduct of targeted killings in pursuit of military objectives on the battlefield, and look at this through a moral and ethical lens of just war theory in order to determine if these nation states are balancing the pervasive development of these lethal technologies with the ethical and moral responsibility of doing so. Throughout the literature review, some common themes started popping up in the works that I was reading. Amongst the research examined, individuals typically took one of two positions, which I classified as either alarmists or the hawks. The alarmists were the ones who were basically rebelling against the idea of artificial intelligence development, and they were all talking about killer robots and the Terminator conundrum, essentially Skynet taking over the world. The hawks were more of the rulers of the world, talking about the militaristic applicability of these systems and how they would be great for the nation that developed them first. There was very little middle ground there, and it's easy to explain and understand why when you consider the common themes and issues that were being discussed. Humanitarian rights being a big one, humanitarian laws being another, and then meaningful human control, which is really a broad coalescing point used to describe the thresholds of human control that are considered necessary as a policy approach in ongoing deliberations for AI development. Bias was also a big one. Bias added a general level of anxiety around the accuracy of artificial intelligence, particularly the biological priming of social biases that would be incorporated or subconsciously programmed into artificial intelligence algorithms that then go into the lethal autonomous weapon systems. Others argued that biases were beneficial, that they were adaptive survival mechanisms that enabled speed and scrutiny of target detection, rapid choice selection, and completion of problem solving, which might otherwise be abandoned early on. Another key theme in some of the examined discussion on lethal autonomous weapon systems was the argument that, if developed, these weapons should exist for extreme cases of self-defense only. This research posited that nation states should view lethal autonomous weapon systems in much the same light that they view nuclear weapons, as a means from deterring dangerous rivals from using such weapons against their peer nations. And moving down to the research gaps, there were three main issues that I came up with. One was that, as I mentioned, there was no middle ground. It's a polarizing topic. Folks were either futurists, they were alarmists, or they were pretty hawkish about America's intent to develop lethal autonomous weapon systems. The other issue is that there's still a lack of international consensus on the topic. Folks are still trying to define what an attack is, for an example. So that presented some challenges in finding a stationary target. It's right now it's all discussion at this point. And then the other issue is that it's rapid technological expansion. So policy creation has not caught up with this yet, and articles from 3-5 years ago are essentially behind the power curve as nations continue to develop artificial intelligence and infuse this into advanced weaponry. And now getting into the theoretical framework. While fundamental ethical and moral disagreements between groups and individual actors exist in war, just war theorists tend to agree that most, if not all, actors apply some form of an ethical and moral framework in their approach to warfare. This thesis makes repeated reference to the validity of just war theory and its usefulness in examining conflict and warfare. The basis of its utility really lies in the fact that it serves as a bridge, an intellectual compromise between other foundational moral philosophies. And although each philosophy is well respected and valid in some respects, it is arguably only just war theory that successfully spans the ethical spectrum and can broadly range various situations within war. For example, other moral philosophies, namely realism, utilitarianism, militarism, and pacifism, were considered. Realism, though, it's essentially the opposite of just war theory. It calls for no ethical considerations or limitations in times of war. And briefly put, realists feel that there's no place for ethics in warfare or in the decisions that lead to war, declaring war, or within war. Second, utilitarianism. It states that actions are to be judged only by their consequences and nothing else. So in other words, the ends justify the means. And in judging these consequences, the only determining factor is the amount of happiness or unhappiness that is created, with all else being irrelevant. Third, militarism. Militarists are aware of war's horrors, but are convinced that these horrors are much more than compensated for by the gains of war. As opposed to realists, militarists see that ethics are present in war, but that the true moral imperative really just exists in the preservation of the nation. And lastly, pacifism. It was considered, but it espouses that war is morally wrong in any and all situations and encourages all people to reject not only combat, but also armed conflicts and violence in general, which I really couldn't apply this that framework to the development of a lethal autonomous weapon system. So for my research design and methods, my design was really to identify the research, synthesize the themes and narratives from that research, and then evaluate the ethical and moral context of that content to gain meaning and understanding, and relay that meaning and understanding with regards to the use of machines for waging warfare and conducting targeted killings on the battlefield. My sources included secondary data to include peer-reviewed journals, scholarly articles, investigative journalist articles, published books, and nonprofit institutional research analysis and website publications. Some of the limitations, things that I've mentioned already, the bias in some of the research, folks were either, for the most part, alarmists or they were hawkish. The fact that there's a vast amount of literature and perspectives makes it a little bit difficult. Plus the fact that, articles from 5 years ago have already been outpaced by the technological development within artificial intelligence. And then some of the limited data points on the current levels of fusion of AI into lethal autonomous weapon systems, because, a lot of this stuff is still, they're state secrets. And so it's hard to find some exact data on this topic. So getting into my references, and I understand I'm almost 3.5 minutes past the time limit here, but you can see some of these published books, these peer-reviewed journals, articles, investigative journalist articles that I'm mentioning as I go through and highlight these references. And with that, I appreciate you taking the time to review my PowerPoint here, and I look forward to the comments below. Thanks.